open to happy days. The powerful forces now fighting against the traditional American family. How Democrats succeeded in creating Hillary's village.
To raise a happy, healthy, and hopeful child, it takes a family.
Shouted down. President Biden's big money donors face angry protesters over support for Israel. Do these protests handcuff his appeal to swing voters? Plus, life imitates art. How Sean Combs' lyrics tell us a lot about how he lived. Sex in the Porsche. Attorney Gloria Allred on ending the hip-hop double standard. And all the president's men. President Biden sits alongside former Presidents Obama and Clinton at a fundraiser. How did the 81-year-old stack up next to his younger predecessors?
I said, I'll give you 3 strokes if you carry your own bag.
Welcome to the Ferris Show on television. First tonight on this Good Friday, the death of the traditional American family. The family is no longer celebrated in our culture, no longer championed by our politicians. Fewer Americans are choosing to start one. A study from Pew Research finds more than 2/3 of Americans between the ages of 25 and 49 lived with a spouse and a child in 1970. As of 2021, that number is down to 37%, a 40% drop. The divide in American politics is now about values. Take last night, for example, when both President Biden and his challenger visited New York City. Former President Trump went to the wake of an NYPD officer killed by a career criminal. President Biden attended a fundraiser with Lizzo. She's a singer, if you didn't know. It's traditional values versus elite progressive values. It's that simple. Politics, we were told by Andrew Breitbart, is downstream of culture. All right. So one party embraces the death of the nuclear family, and the other decries it. Right, wrong, you can decide, but those are the facts. Author Kelly Maria Korducki cites the study we just told you about in her latest article in Business Insider, the death of the typical nuclear family. The American family was a blip. It is time to rethink it, she wrote. Research shows one of the single greatest indicators of success or failure for a young person is coming from a stable household with 2 parents. For example, children who grew up with both parents are less likely to live in poverty or be incarcerated and are more likely to graduate college. Yet Korducki suggests the traditional American family is unsustainable in today's society. Quote, the nuclear family's guise of self-sufficiency only barely conceals its toxic codependency with the market economy. For that dynamic also makes the nuclear family particularly vulnerable to economic pressures. And Kelly is with us now, author of the book, Hard to Do, The Surprising Feminist History of Breaking Up. Thank you. We appreciate you being here. All else equal, do you have sort of an inherent problem with the concept of the nuclear family?
No. I mean, I wasn't writing an opinion piece about why the family is bad, but rather tracing an economic and cultural history really of the last century and a half, and just observing that the nuclear family kind of peaked during this very brief window and then has been steadily declining ever since. And just kind of asking questions about why it peaked when it peaked and what caused that, and also why it's been on the decline. And it sort of seems that this is a sudden trend, like millennials aren't having kids or Gen Z, but that's not.
Well, you study this stuff, right? So is this a good thing that this is happening and something to be celebrated, or a bad thing that it's happening for our country and something that we need to reverse?
I don't think that that's necessarily the most productive way of addressing it. I don't think that reversing it or not reversing it is necessarily going to. We should look at the underlying causes of what's causing it to erode and see about addressing those, and not, I don't know, go on like a PR campaign to convince people that a nuclear family is right for them. Because really, the family is deteriorating for all sorts of reasons, and a lot of it isn't by choice. A lot of people who would prefer to be in a traditional nuclear family unit, like, the Cleavers in Leave It to Beaver, just simply can't for all sorts of reasons.
Look, I think you make a great point that the economics have changed, right? When Leave It to Beaver and Happy Days and everything else existed, middle-class income of a father could support a family of four, and you could take a vacation and all those things. Now you need two incomes, so the idea of a stay-at-home mom is gone, and those dynamics have changed. But you say it's not the best way to look at it, and I'm wondering why, because you think about outcomes of two-parent homes being in a non-intact home more than triples both black and white children's odds of being in poverty. Those growing up from non-intact families are twice as likely to have been incarcerated compared to those from intact families, regardless of race. So if we know that traditional families breed better outcomes, why shouldn't we encourage it?
Well, I don't have the studies in front of me that are the sources of that particular data that you just cited. But I agree, absolutely. Like, obviously, stability, emotional stability, healthy role models, economic stability, these are all really, really important factors for anybody's well-being. But I think, again, this conversation often gets framed as sort of like a moral choice. And I don't know if that's necessarily a productive way of looking at things. And it's worth asking how we could potentially facilitate more stability within society by providing people the means to be more stable.
Okay, and so you view this purely sort of from a Marxist economic standpoint?
Well, I wouldn't say purely from a Marxist economic standpoint, no. But even, David Brooks is not a Marxist, and he basically made this exact same argument in The Atlantic in 2020, right before the pandemic started. It's actually funny, it was the March 2020 cover story for The Atlantic. So literally this thing comes out like 3 weeks before the world goes into lockdown. And once the world went into lockdown, a lot of the issues that his piece talked about, and that my piece also talks about, became just like glaringly obvious to everybody who was stuck at home trying to balance work and taking care of the kids and virtual schooling and all of these other things. So there's certainly Marxist economic theorists would agree with some of what I'm saying, but it isn't particularly radical. If David Brooks is writing about it in The Atlantic, it's not
point taken. But you think about this is from the Institute for Family Studies. Percentage of students who graduate college by family type. Married parents, 43%. Divorced mother, 31%. Adoptive, 27%. Widowed mom or dad, 27%. All the way down to foster parents, 14%. Grandparents, only 13%. Tearing down the idea of traditional family structure is part of the Marxist socialist playbook. It just is. And that's a big part of it, that the state plays this enormously important role and families and parents have far less control. When has that ever worked out well?
Well, I mean, I think we're sort of talking about two different things.
Are we?
I sort of think so. I mean, I'm not advocating against the nuclear family or saying that it's bad or that there's some kind of better way, but rather just pointing out that it's been trending downward and there are reasons for why that's happening. And, you know, I don't know if there is a better alternative. I think that remains to be seen. And certainly,
so if we know that the outcomes, are better, and I think you would agree, the outcomes are better when you have a nuclear family, a traditional family, why shouldn't we advocate for something that gives children, our future, a better outcome?
Well, I think that we should advocate for something that gives our children a better outcome. And I make some suggestions toward the end of my article in that direction. You know, healthcare access and availability for all would be useful. Something I don't mention, but that I think that a lot of people would agree about would be just, some kind of affordable affordable childcare provisions. That would be huge. There's a pretty strong case for policies that would make it easier to have kids, producing more people getting together and having kids.
Yeah, well, having kids is necessary for a society, especially if we all want to have Medicare and Social Security when you and I retire. Kelly, thank you very much. We appreciate it. Welcome back anytime. Yeah, no, it's an important conversation, maybe even the most important conversation right now in America. We'll talk soon. Thank you. Speaking of traditional values, doing what you're supposed to do is one of them. It's pretty simple, like basic things, showing up for work, showing up for school. That's gone these days. Now much of the country views school as optional. America's elite would tell you making kids go to school is somehow unfair. Expectations and demands and standards are somehow unfair. Before the pandemic, absenteeism in school was at 15%. Go to 2023 and it's now to 26%. The darker the shade, the higher the absentee rate. You can see the difference across America 3 years apart. New Mexico, for example, Michigan has high absenteeism. Oregon, Washington State, California. It's even worse in the poor districts, where 32% of students are missing class. As usual, the soft bigotry of low expectations hurts the poorest and least fortunate among us. Elites send their kids to private school while advocating zero consequences when poor kids miss school and forbidding parents from having school choice where attendance is demanded. Nothing speaks to that more than the teachers union, who claim to care about kids while only enriching themselves. It's not only the poor who get hurt the most with lax policies. Absenteeism is the worst in non-white districts. In 2019, 17% of students of color were skipping class. Last year, 30%. That's almost double the amount of students not going to school. In mostly white districts, it did jump 13%, but only to 22% in 2023. In other words, the very permissive progressive policies that champion the least fortunate among us hurt poor, black, and brown communities the very most. It's not about politics. It's about values. Diddy is spotted out on the town speaking of values as the rap mogul faces an investigation into sex trafficking. Can we finally get rid of the hip-hop double standard and start holding rappers accountable? And later, talk about optics. President Biden joined former Presidents Obama and Clinton in New York. The danger of standing next to more popular, younger men as a re-election strategy.
Before, when he came into the Oval, before he got sworn in, I said, I'll give you 3 strokes if you carry your own bag.
Sean Diddy Combs headed out with his daughters in Miami to Topgolf. It's the first time anybody's seen the hip-hop mogul since the sex trafficking raids on his L.A. and Miami homes. The New York Post wraps up the week for Diddy with a new article, quote, "Inside Diddy's circle of sex, drugs, and violence." Rapper Mark Curry, who was signed to Combs' Bad Boy Records in the aughts, that'd be the early 2000s, said of Diddy, he's surrounded by movers and shakers. When you think of the music industry, a lot of illegal things go on behind closed doors. He took advantage of a lot of people who had dreams. Famed women's rights attorney Gloria Allred is with us. Gloria, thank you, as always. Is this hip-hop's Me Too moment?
Well, it certainly is in many ways. But there may also be persons who allege that they are victims who are men. And that's also possible. And this reminds me very much, by the way, Leland, of the R. Kelly situation, because I represented a number of victims of R. Kelly. And there, the prosecutors in the Eastern District of New York actually prosecuted, and based on the testimony of a number of my clients who were victims and some others as well, he was convicted, and he's now serving time in prison, federal prison. and he was sentenced in New York. Here we have P. Diddy, and he is also, there are also allegations that he sex trafficked underage girls. And that was really the main allegation in the R. Kelly case as well. And these prosecutors are also in New York, although it's the Southern District of New York. And I think that allegation alone is taken very seriously by federal prosecutors. And I think he's got a lot to be concerned about. By the way, here, I do represent 2 alleged victims of R. Kelly. Excuse me, of
Mr. Combs. Okay.
I represented many more in the case of R. Kelly.
Yeah, in the R. Kelly case. Daily Mail, 50 Cent's baby mama, Daphne Joy, is named as Diddy's sex worker. Bombshell lawsuit from an ex-employee shedding new light on the bitter rift between the rappers. You have this long history, right, with these singers. You go back to R. Kelly and now P. Diddy. These men rapped in ways, in their lyrics and what they wrote and what they sang and what they celebrated in the lifestyle. We're talking about doing things to women that we certainly can't discuss here, and lyrics I'm not going to read because I know my mother is watching, and yet nobody cared, right? All of the women's lib movement and the champions of women all listened to their music and said these are just artists and this is just them living their truths and on and on and on. Is the double standard for hip-hop, you think, going to end?
Well, I think now with this raid that just took place on his Los Angeles home, on his home in Miami, he's got a lot to be concerned about. Of course, he's denying the allegations that are being made against him in 4 lawsuits. But whatever would happen with those 4 lawsuits, I don't think that the prosecutors would be conducting a raid, which of course would have to be approved by a judge, unless they were serious and had reason to believe that there was relevant evidence in his homes. So, yeah, I think he's got a lot to be concerned about, despite the fact that he's denying the allegations, which are not yet charges, and we'll have to wait and see if they ever are.
And I know you wouldn't take cases if you didn't think that there was really some substantial evidence behind them. But just if we zoom out for a minute into sort of culture rather than just law, are you seeing a change, or does there need to be a change about the way women are spoken about in hip-hop music, and that then translates, and do you see a connection into then how these very powerful men actually treat their women?
Yes, and that has been a concern of many in the women's movement, including me, for a long time, because you can't just keep demonizing women, trivializing women, suggesting that somehow they should be, they should not be believed, or they're only there for sexual purposes, without that having an impact on the culture and the status and the image of women. So that's very, very important. You can't treat it as, oh, this is just music. It doesn't matter what is said about women. It does matter. And by the way, many of these celebrities who are in the music industry, they know no boundaries. They're rich, they're famous, they're powerful. It's very seductive for young women to want to go to the parties that are routinely conducted at the homes of celebrities. It's exciting, and especially for young women who would like to break into the music industry. And, they don't know when they go there, and I'm speaking in general, that there may be drugs, there may be violence, there may be manipulation, there may be, all kinds of injustices, wrongs against them. In some cases, in the R. Kelly case, there were actually pornographic videos that underage girls who were sex trafficked, were forced to make. And then in that case, it seemed as though those videos were used as a form of intimidation and blackmail, that if the young victim ever said anything, the threat was that they would be released into the public stream. And that was, of course, very shocking and disturbing and intimidating to young women. Now, we'll have to see what is in, Combs' home. We'll have to see what is discovered. We won't know really what that is and the context of it, unless and until there is a prosecution.
Right.
And, he does enjoy a presumption of innocence at this point, and we'll see what happens.
Gloria, thank you. You were the right guest for this to put it all into context. I think you made some awfully important points in terms of they just can't be lyrics. We'll talk soon. Thank you. Have a great Easter.
Thank you. You too.
Yes.
And same to
yes,
you, Mom.
ma'am. Awesome jacket as well. The Taliban resumes stoning women for adultery. Maybe Combs can rap about that. What happened to the kinder, gentler Taliban President Biden promised after the disastrous withdrawal? And how long till the terrorists start using Afghanistan again?
Over time, depending on what the Taliban does, how it follows through on its commitments with respect to safe passage, how it deals with the treatment of women, how it deals with its international commitments not to allow Afghanistan to become a base for terrorism in the rest of the world, we can make further determinations about both diplomatic presence and other issues as we go.
That was National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan a couple of years ago with all the ways the Taliban would make Afghanistan better. Today, the Taliban announced the resumption of public stonings. The Taliban's leader says women's rights are incompatible with Sharia law, sort of like the Taliban going back to the future. And thus, according to the leader of the Taliban, his government will now stone women to death for adultery. It's been 900 days since America's embarrassing withdrawal from Kabul. The country is largely the same as it was before 9/11. The Taliban in charge, women stoned, and terrorist training camps. Former UN Ambassador John Bolton is with us. He served as National Security Advisor under President Trump. Mr. Ambassador, good to see you as always. Thank you. Look, we sort of had the same kind of view of the Middle East, did we not, and of Afghanistan, say 1998, 1999?
Right. This is back to the future. And anybody who is surprised that the Taliban has now announced they are violating yet another component of the agreement that President Trump and Secretary of State Pompeo negotiated really needs to wake up. This was entirely foreseeable. I don't think you can trust the Taliban as far as you can throw them. I don't think they had any intention whatever of meeting any of their significant commitments having to do with our withdrawal or having to do with how they would run the country once they took over. And this is just one more piece of evidence, of which there's a mountain already, that they intend to pursue the same line they did before, or maybe even worse, in this radical theocracy they're creating.
You said something interesting about trusting the Taliban, and it's not just the Taliban we're trusting right now, right? We're trusting Iran about its nuclear intentions. We're trusting Russia to a certain extent on certain issues. We're certainly trusting the Chinese on a number of issues, and counting sort of on all of these bad men in the world to keep their word, if you will. Why is that, you think?
Because I think the people who make those agreements on the American side are naive. I think they don't understand what the nature of both totalitarian and terrorist organizations really is. Now, they will say, no, we go with Ronald Reagan, trust but verify. Okay, let's take stoning in Afghanistan, stoning women to death for adultery. Now you have it verified. What credibility does Taliban have on anything? I mean, we should have started practically the day we made the agreement when they were after American and other NATO forces as the withdrawal took place. And I would say the same for negotiations with Hamas that the administration is pressing on Israel right now. I am confident that Hamas did not comply with the terms of the first ceasefire agreement, under which some hostages were released, but they took advantage of it to regroup and rearm and get ready for the next phase of the war. And they would do the same in the next ceasefire. I just think terrorists, radical extremists like that are inherently untrustworthy, and verification doesn't do anything once they violated the agreement and put you or women in Afghanistan, in this case, in a far worse position.
Afghanistan, we can all agree, probably is a difficult place in terms of the U.S. exerting any kind of real power over. But Iran, certainly we've got some very serious sticks, if you will, to be able to use against Iran and its proxies, the same with China and the same with Russia. There appears to be this idea, and look, we dealt with it after the withdrawal in Afghanistan, that if we're nice enough to the Taliban or we're nice enough to the Iranians, then by some extension they're going to do sort of what we want, but at least things won't get worse. They won't escalate. And I'm wondering where the trigger line, or if you're seeing any trigger lines around the world for the United States.
Well, look, I think the attitude you're describing is kind of the Bobbsey twins do foreign policy, that if only we're nice to these evil people, they'll see that we have no hostile intent and everything will work out. And what the adversary sees, they don't mirror image like we do. They look at us and see a decadent, declining, weak society, and they're going to take advantage of us. Look, I think the negotiations already between Israel and Hamas, that we've pushed Israel too far on this. I think they ought to get on with the war. The way to solve the humanitarian problem is eliminate Hamas. We're going to see, I'm very worried, we're going to see Chinese action along its Indo-Pacific periphery, maybe against Taiwan, maybe in the South China Sea, maybe against India, sometime in the near future, because China thinks, rightly in many respects, that our bandwidth is exhausted right now with Ukraine, the Middle East, a divisive presidential election. And they think they're pushing on an open door because they see a very weak White House.
All right. Ambassador, thank you very much. Happy Easter to you and yours, sir.
Likewise. Happy Easter.
All right. Not by his choice, but President Biden's foreign policy did play a large part in last night's star-studded New York fundraiser. Pro-Hamas protesters berated the wealthy donors as they left. We'll get to more of the politics of Israel a little bit later for Mr. Biden, especially the domestic politics. But first, this big event. Late-night host Stephen Colbert moderated a conversation with Biden and his two former Democratic predecessors.
I told him once before when he came into the Oval, before he got sworn in, I said, I'll give you 3 strokes if you carry your own bag.
Body language expert, behavior analyst Greg Hartley joins us now. Good to see you, as always, Greg. I was kind of fascinated by watching the three of them on stage interact together. We'll start with President Biden and what you were seeing in that moment there.
Well, you can't miss this guy has aged, clearly. I mean, he's 80-plus years old, and you can see that his communication style has dropped off a fair amount. But even then, the human body is trying to punctuate what the brain is trying to say. And you can watch him using illustrators. Even though his words are not coming, his illustrators are trying to make the point of this probably very well scripted story he's going to use that he's told over and over and over. There are really 5 pieces of body language, and one of those is illustrators, and that's what we're seeing his hands do.
So the hands are illustrating. He was sort of getting to the punchline there. Yeah. We'll now look at, and this is important because in this case, none of them, as far as we could hear, I mean, they were talking amongst themselves, but we couldn't hear them in the words. All 3 presidents, Biden, Obama, and Clinton, as they walked into this big fundraiser. So we'll play the clip and then get your thoughts on each one. I guess that would be the end as the curtain came down, but yeah. What'd you make of it?
So I always say the organism does what made the organism successful. That doesn't always mean that it's a healthy kind of success. In their case, clearly it has been to get them to as far as they've gone. But watch Clinton connect with the audience. That's his power, his superpower is connecting with people. Watch Obama act really cool and disconnected. That's been his thing. But watch Biden. He's standing not sure what to do and then raises his hand and starts trying to do what he typically does. Biden has really 2 things that I've watched his whole life, and those are come on, man, and now look. And that now look thing is when he puts both hands up and he's driving. Come on, man, is when he's challenging. This is him just standing there kind of awkwardly waiting. These are the two cooler kids in the room, I think, is part of it.
Yeah, the two cooler kids, the two younger kids, the two more popular kids. And there was a lot of discussion, I know, among Democrats about whether or not creating that juxtaposition, especially for not only their donors, but for the press that's undoubtedly going to cover this, how good of an idea that was. Maybe they felt like they didn't have a choice. The split screen, obviously, yesterday, and we covered this a lot in terms of the politics of it, was President Trump showed up at the wake of an NYPD officer who had been killed in the line of duty by a career criminal. He spoke outside of the funeral home. Take a listen.
And this is what happened, is such a sad event, such a horrible thing, and it's happening all too often, and we're just not going to let it happen. We just can't. 21 times arrested, this thug.
All right. This would be my question. Is there anything in Trump's body language that says he cares about anything other than himself and how he's being seen by the media as he's delivering these remarks?
Well, typically, I think of Trump as all up here. His hands are all up, moving around. Those illustrators we were talking about before have been his stock in trade and what he's done. Here we see his hands in his pockets. Maybe it's coaching, but certainly his energy level is low, which is very appropriate for the situation he's in. His tone of voice has changed. Everything about him is moving more slowly. We associate that with sadness and with feeling. Now, he does move his hands a little, but he also doesn't bring them up. So it looks good for him. I've said before, he has changed fundamentally how he's signaling as he moves into the third election.
Yeah. No, it's a very different Donald Trump in many ways. And clearly 8 years of age has made him a lot different than in 2016 as well. Greg, this is always a fascinating segment. Also one of our highest rated. So we always appreciate you being here. Thank you.
Real pleasure. Thank you, Lee.
Yeah. President Biden is making a direct appeal to Nikki Haley voters, but will pro-Hamas protesters, like the people shouting at these folks, keep Biden from grabbing centrist Republicans that refuse to back Trump?
She's sitting there like...
She's gone crazy. She's a very angry person.
She is not presidential timber. I don't need votes. We have all the votes we need.
That's President Biden's latest campaign appeal to voters who will likely decide the election. Nikki Haley right now might be the most powerful person in politics. In the recent Arizona Republican primary, 19% of voters still cast their ballot for her, even though she dropped out weeks ago. About 100,000 people in Arizona voted for Nikki Haley. Arizona is one of 7 states that will decide this year's presidential election in 2020. Biden won it by 10,000 votes. That's 10% of Haley's total. With us now, David Drucker, senior writer for The Dispatch. Okay, look, these are the very same people that are, shall we say, suburban Republicans, well-educated, wealthier, Nikki Haley-type voters that you and I found in New Hampshire and South Carolina and in Iowa. In 2020, they were choosing against the unknown, which was, at the time, Joe Biden against mean tweets Donald Trump. Now, Biden's got a record, and those suburban voters do not like that record. You know that old story about fool me once.
That's correct, Leland. So you have two things competing against each other. You have a president who now has a record, and Republicans who I like to talk about belonging to the Ronald Reagan faction of the Republican Party, now a minority faction compared to Trump's populist conservatives. They could imagine Joe Biden to be whatever they wanted him to be in 2020, not so much anymore, and that's part of what I discovered in reporting out this latest story for The Dispatch. There are a lot of things these voters are concerned about when it comes to Joe Biden. On the other hand, this competes against Donald Trump's post-2020 election record that includes denying his loss to Joe Biden, claiming the election was stolen in January 6th. And all of this has just continued 9-10 years on. And so which direction do they want to go? And that's something we don't know yet. All right. So you think about what we saw last night
in New York, and I'm not talking about the three presidents together. I'm talking about the mob outside waiting for all the donors, the pro-Hamas mob, the very progressive part of the Democratic Party that does not like Joe Biden. If Joe Biden tacks to the center meaningfully on any of these issues that the Ronald Reagan Republicans care about, last night is going to look like a party compared to what's going to happen in Chicago come the convention. Joe Biden doesn't have any room to tack to the center. Donald Trump does.
Well, it's a very interesting thing here because Donald Trump could tack to the center and probably improve his election prospects, except he continually refuses to do so and will often say that his base is bigger than most people think, and he's very comfortable catering to his base. Joe Biden's coalition I've always described as being a mile wide and an inch deep, right? They've always come together, or they came together in 2020 because they didn't like Donald Trump. And so I think the question is, can he do in 2024 what he did in 20, which is there are a lot of voters that are not as excited about him as they were about Barack Obama or Bill Clinton, to compare some of the other presidents at that fundraiser last night. But will the fear of Trump and what he could do to the country over the next 4 years bring this coalition back together? That's also something we don't know yet. It could happen, but it may not.
Right. I guess the ... would be, will Trump's ego allow him to court Nikki Haley voters? Because he loves telling people he doesn't. Well, okay.
No. His ego won't allow it. Will his advisors convince him to do it? Will polling change? And when polling changes, Trump can all of a sudden get flexible, at least for a few seconds or so. That could happen. But as long as Donald Trump looks at polling and believes he's ahead, Leland, I don't think you're going to see him alter his behavior or his approach.
Fair enough. And I guess the Trump folks would say, why would he? If polling shows he's ahead. David, it's always good. Great reporting. We follow you on Twitter and obviously at the Dispatch as well. And keep reading. It's always great stuff. Thank you.
Thanks, Leland.
Yeah. St. Louis's mayor has a plan for combating crime, a new plan to make one of America's most dangerous cities safer.
So how can we hold those business owners accountable and also bring down crime? And then some of the things that we're already doing, we're finding that other mayors are doing as well.
All right. She wants to blame the businesses, not the criminals. We'll see how that's going to work out next.
Adulthood. That's why vaccines matter so much. For 40 years, Rotary and partners have delivered vaccines globally. Like here and even here, in your neighborhood and around the world, Rotary is ensuring children grow up safe from preventable diseases.
Every moment counts if you're at risk or living with lung cancer. And anyone with lungs can get lung cancer. It causes more cancer deaths than breast, colon, and prostate combined. And while there may be moments where you question your next step, through it all, Go-To for Lung Cancer is here for you. We are your community. For screening, treatment, and survivorship support, Go-To is your go-to. Confronting lung cancer starts here. Visit goto.org.
At YMCA Summer Camp, kids find their why. Friendship and fun, a world of adventure beneath a golden sun. Running, laughing, full of wonder. Being themselves is second nature. Summer camp is where they begin to unlock the confidence that lies within. When kids find new passions, they find their why. Summer camp season starts soon. Learn more at ymca.org for a better us.
It's Friday. Sometimes you hear something that explains precisely why a problem exists. We reported extensively on the crime problem in my hometown of St. Louis, Missouri. It is now one of the most dangerous cities in America. It doesn't need to be, but it is. It, of course, unquestionably hurts the black community the most. Homicide is now the leading cause of death for young black males, 0 to 45 years of age. The mayor of St. Louis headed to Memphis for the Black Mayors Conference and talked with a local station there about her new idea to prevent crime in St. Louis.
We have a lot of violence around convenience stores and gas stations. So how can we hold those business owners accountable and also bring down crime? And then some of the things that we're already doing, we're finding that other mayors are doing as well.
So you heard that correctly. We must hold business owners accountable for crime criminals commit near their businesses. If it sounds familiar, that's because this is not the first time we've heard a suggestion like this. Here's Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison talking about his plan for stopping car theft.
We've also got to go upstream. We've got to make sure that the automobiles are not so easy to steal so that they're a tempting, attractive nuisance for young people. And, you know, right now we are investigating 2 major automakers because their cars are dramatically too easy to steal.
There you go. We're going to have more on these innovative crime-fighting techniques and, more importantly, who is funding them next week. You can read about it first in War Notes. That's our daily newsletter. Comes out every day at 4 p.m. You can subscribe for free. It's our thoughts on the most important stories of the day. Go to warnotes.com and you can reply to that or see us on social media at Leland Vittert. We read each and every one of them, and now we will respond. Hatteras88 writes on Instagram about the bridge coverage, "You looked uncomfortably cold." And yes, it was really cold. It was cold on the water and that night in Baltimore. Add to that pitch black darkness, and it is unimaginable what the people on the bridge went through. Andy Cohen writes in response to our Instagram reel about recent fentanyl coverage, saying 70% of fentanyl is brought into this country by Americans. What are we doing about demand? Nothing. You're right, Andy, and that's part of the problem. As we said, the fentanyl crisis doesn't have easy solutions. It requires both political parties to confront some very difficult truths, and that is something our politicians do not want to do. Doug replied to yesterday's War Notes saying Sean Diddy Combs isn't the only one. Questions why him, why now? When will they take on the others? Or Doug, why has it taken this long? Rappers sing about a lifestyle of misogyny and crime and violence towards women and objectifying women. That's a fact. It shouldn't come as a surprise that they have firsthand experiences. George replied yesterday to War Notes, why hasn't someone polled Americans on how they feel about Hamas's refusal to unconditionally release and account for all the hostages? Great question, George. And we will indeed poll that and get back to you. It'll be interesting to see what the 50% of Americans 18 to 34 who support Hamas say to that question. Mark replied to yesterday's War Notes about the death of baseball. Baseball is a game that embraces failure. If you get on base 3 out of 10 times throughout your career, you are headed for the Hall of Fame. American kids hate failure and stopped playing the game 30 years ago. You're right, Mark. One cannot have success without first experiencing failure, lots of it. It's a lesson I learned very young in journalism and in other places. And of course, I'm better for it. I will learn about failure over and over and over again on the golf course this weekend. Staying humble isn't just important for us, kids, or for kids. It's important for all of us. DC's beautiful this time. It's spring. The innocence of summer is coming with longer nights for conversation. I hope you spend some time this weekend with the people you love, and this may be the most important part. Tell them you love them. There'll be a time in your life when you won't be able to say that anymore, and you'll wish you did it more. I'll see you on Monday. Here's Chris.